Mobile cell phone usage took 16 years to reach 100 million users. Facebook
Wow.
took 4 years. ChatGPT took 3 months. Or it's like the swan mentality, right? Like you have
Mm.
a swan that goes on, yeah, it's kind of moving on the pool, and you see this calm individual that's kind of just cruising along. But if you go underneath the water, you'll see this legs flapping like mad. Well, I think technology is one of the biggest enabler, if you were to think about it that way. It bridges the gap between aspiration and actual making it real.
And as generations pass on, these kids won't have the experience if the parents didn't teach them that to what being human means. They
Yeah,
think being human means technology.
yeah.
So how do you see that point? This is Stephen Cyrus Saper in the Conversation Podcast by the Immigrant Storyteller, and welcome to the show. Hey, brother, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Likewise, man. Thanks for having me over.
It's so funny. You've done so much in the world of technology, and I was really excited to get you on the show. We have more and more interest now because of what I've done in the past. So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get started in this business? What's your background? And then we'll go from there.
So my name is Tejas Dixit. I work at Microsoft, but I was initially, engineer by design. Then I did my B school, and literally out of my engineering, I started a company called Scan Equipments, which was basically focused on this electromechanical kind of integration. And then I moved to the US in 1998, spent about 4 or 5 years in the CRM industry. That time it was kind of heating up. Joined Microsoft in my first round of Microsoft. This is my second round, Call of Duty, so to speak. And so in the first round, I spent most of my time in marketing and corporate strategy. And then I left in between to go and start a couple of startups because that time social media was heating up. It was this next frontier. People were trying to figure out what to do with it. There was no defined ROI, especially in the earned media space. And so I started a couple of these startups. One was focused around marketing services. It was like an agency. And then we built a product called Outwoot, which was trying to help marketers gain ROI from their earned media efforts. Because that time,
Mhm.
most of the companies and a lot of tools were focused on paid media, like ads on Facebook and stuff. And I wanted to tackle the space, which was because after a certain point of time, the paid media starts giving you diminishing returns unless you supplement that with earned media. And so did that for a few years. One of those companies merged into a larger system integrator that I spent 4 years with them. And there we were building cloud practices. And so it kind of made sense for me to come back to Microsoft. Um, and since then, I've been here mostly on the product side. First, this was data, and now it's Copilot.
What excited you to get involved with technology in the first place?
Well, I think technology is one of the biggest enabler, if you were to think about it that way. It bridges the gap between aspiration and actual making it real. Um, the technology play has been there for a while, but especially since the advent of mobile, it started getting accelerated, right? I mean, if you think about just the space in itself, mobile cell phone usage took 16 years to reach 100 million users. Facebook
Wow.
took 4 years. ChatGPT took 3 months. And so the velocity on technology has ever, you know, getting stronger and stronger. And so the time between aspiration and value has dramatically reduced. It continues to be reduced. I don't even know how far it would go. It will probably be within a day or two that you will start getting value for what used to take years before. And
Hmm.
so I feel that it is one of the biggest catalysts of growth in general. I had the background or had the privilege of having the background of engineering that led me to this almost organically, more than having to pick. And
Hmm.
so it just happened organically, and I'm very happy with it.
Obviously, there's a big difference between working for a company like Microsoft and starting your own. What are the differences in those worlds?
I believe that the and it doesn't work for everybody. For me, at least, the diversity of experiences has been a blessing. Some people thrive in it, some people don't like it. I've worked with with a small company, with a mid-sized company. I've started a startup. I've worked with large companies like Microsoft. And there are learnings from literally everywhere. I mean, in fact, one of the learnings that I bring from my startup world is actually I get to work within Microsoft on these 0 to 1 plays, right? Like these startup initiatives. It's like actually working in a startup with a lot of funding. We don't have to go
Mm.
raise money, right? But you get the same level of drive, you get the same level of intensity, you get the same level of gratification at the end of the day. But one of my biggest learnings, I would actually maybe say two things, right? One is the the variety of this experience actually gets you to realize that if I ask you, hey, Stephen, what is the most nerve-wracking thing that you've done in your professional life? And there are a whole varied type of answers that you get. And I feel that in my world, if you have run a startup for 3 years, every 28th of a month, you have no idea how you're going to do payroll for the 10 people, 12 people, 15 people that work for you. And you've done it 36 times, for example. That gives you a much better perspective around what truly matters. And when you come back with that experience into a larger setup, I feel the biggest difference from my first time at Microsoft and second time at Microsoft is that I don't get as anxious or bothered about things that I used to get bothered before because of that lived experience and that perspective that you learn through that experience.
Mhm.
And so, it's kind of it's simplifying things, but I feel that that actually helps you in a much bigger way than you can imagine, because it kind of bleeds into everything that you do. And so you're more calm, you're more kind of grounded. Um, so that's essentially, I would say, it's probably the biggest learning for me.
Creating your own company, starting your own tech startups, that gave you the experience sailing choppy waters in a really calm way, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, I mean, dealing with ambiguity is like, again, it's like a cliche statement, but you really get a sense, a better sense of what it is and what that means when you run your own startup, right?
Mm.
Because everything is ambiguous in some way. You are, as a CEO or a president of a company, you're trying to make everything kind of work together, but at the same time, it's like the swan mentality, right? Like you have
Mm.
a swan that goes on, yeah, it's kind of moving on the pool, and you see this calm individual that's kind of just cruising along. But if you go underneath the water, you'll see this legs flapping like mad. And that's a good picture that represents really kind of, regardless of how big or small your gig is, it's the same thing. And so you just learn to deal with these situations better. You have better clarity of mind, I feel. I think the clarity of thought is also kind of gets
Mm.
fine-tuned a little bit more because you are so strapped on resources when you're running your own
Mm.
startup that you have to literally kind of maximize the time that you have, maximize the gray cells that you can apply to a problem, and find the most optimal solution. And you really do not have much resources in hand.
So you have to get more creative, really thinking about what is at your hands. What can you do
Yeah.
without any money, really?
Correct. Or bootstrap, because I had that services gig that was bootstrapping the product thing. And so,
Sure. You mentioned layers of how fast and rapid technology has grown from Facebook to ChatGPT. Can you expand on that and get into the little bit details versus, the Facebook era versus now the ChatGPT era, and what has evolved through this process? What has made it more, turbocharged, so to say?
yeah, I mean, I will kind of ground this in an example that's kind of more relevant to Microsoft, or, that you see in the market. So if you think about it, right, that a lot of these companies, including us at Microsoft, have been in the business of creating tools,
Mm.
right? Features and capabilities that we offer to all users. So think about this as horizontal, right? And we honestly did not care much about what the users really use those tools for to build,
Mm.
right? Like, we didn't care about a legal person using our Word product to create contracts. We didn't care about a financial services person actually using our Excel sheets to create P&Ls, right? And that was what was required at that time. But if you think about what has happened now, is that with the advent of generative AI, all of a sudden the features and capabilities become less important and the content becomes king.
Mm,
So if you think about from our perspective, all of a sudden now we do start caring about all type of users and their needs, which basically
mm,
means that our target users sort of, in addition to the horizontal user, like you and I and whoever uses our tools, go from that plus the domain specific users. We want to make sure that we deliver the right content because the user is actually using generative AI and natural language representation to actually ask it to create that content. So then, from our perspective now, all of a sudden we have to worry about that, and that becomes the magnetic north, which means that we are not just responsible for providing the tool to create a content, but we are actually responsible for also and accountable to actually create that final content as well
mm,
and take it and to a point where the user is happy with it.
mm,
Now that's a big transition, and so that takes everything from how you think about products and how do you think about outcomes and how do you think about actually providing those capabilities in the hands of the users for them to actually do that. And so the one of the fundamental things that changes for us, let's say from a product management perspective, is it's a if you think about the traditional product management, right? Like there is, okay, I need to look at the competition, I need to look at the total addressable market. I'm a CEO of a feature or a product in itself. I write, we write specs, then the designers actually design to the spec, then we actually go to the engineering, and engineering kind of builds it, right? Now, in a core at a core level doesn't change, but if you think about what is happening in context with what I just said, which is transition from these features, capabilities to content, is that yes, you have to be overcharged and supercharged on understanding the competition because we know that today's earth-shatteringly amazing feature and capability can become tomorrow's very basic one, and that tomorrow might be literally a month away. And so you think about that, like you used to have a product kind of building, timeline of 2 to 3 years, and now all of a sudden you're talking about days and weeks and months, right? I mean, and so that velocity of keeping ahead of the competition, understanding the competitions, keeping them in the rear view mirror all the time, and with you look checking that mirror all the time is becoming important. So that competitive landscape and competitive understanding and staying ahead of them is super important, more important than it has ever been before. Second is that, you know if you think about the last 2 years, 2.5 years in this AI space, I would say that it was a honeymoon period, right? There was a lot of novelty factor. There was a lot of instant gratification. There was a lot of curiosity. Like, hey, look, it can draft me an email. It can draft me a, document. It can create a small PPT. It can find an image for me. There was a lot of the delight in that period came from these things like novelty factors and stuff, right? But now the world has kind of gotten to a point where, okay, now AI needs to be in my flow of work, right? And what that means is that you cannot expect users to change their habits. You need to actually infuse AI in the way they're habitually working on
mm,
that particular on that job that they do.
mhm,
A good example of that is if you think about search, right? We were talking about like Google search. If you look at search in general, and let's say you and I, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when search was very relevant and it was coming up, um, I used to search in a particular way. You used to search in a particular way. There are some people who were awesome at searching. They used to actually give this complicated search streams and ands and ifs and stuff, and they used to get great results. Whereas somebody like me, you're like just ask a question like, "Hey, what is it?" or make a comment and expect it to actually give me a response. Now, I don't think our habitually we have changed our preferences how you search. I pretty much search the same way I used to search before. I might have gotten a little better, but pretty much the same way. But the search results are awesome as compared to 20 years ago. The reason because the search algorithms and search technology has gotten better. Same thing is happening in this because instead of a search string is now a prompt.
mhm,
You prompt in a particular way, I prompt in a particular way, but you cannot expect everybody to be a prompt engineer. You need to actually enable the systems to get better, which is what's happening in these models, right? The lab companies, ChatGPT or OpenAI, Anthropic, their models are getting better. And so your habits remain the same. You're just getting better responses back because the technology is changing so fast and rapidly improving, which is called
Mhm.
kind of in some way model forwardness, right? Like the models can do a bunch of different things. And so I feel that that is where the biggest kind of changes in some way. The product management, from that perspective, if you're building product, has to evolve to that reality. And the main kind of sort of drivers of those are things like, okay, you need to look at, you used to always think about design and user interfaces. I think it's less, they become less important. What becomes more important is user experience, which is when you think about a flow of work, you need to really understand where the human needs to be in the loop, where AI needs to be embedded, how it should actually help without expecting humans to change the habits in a big way, right? So from a product management perspective, it's less about writing just specs. All that stuff happens, but there is, product managers needs to kind of start whiteboarding and building some more meat into those capabilities, trying to test it out. Design kind of evolves from the same place. Figmas and stuff that we used to be using for all these screens and stuff, they are relevant, but they also change to more whiteboarding, more kind of real time testing. And one of the most fundamental change that we're already seeing and will see more of from a product management perspective is driven by that reality that content is king, which basically means that you need to constantly evaluate the output. And so all this data science work around evaluations and rubrics and stuff that become very relevant. I mean, you got to literally embrace that. You got to live in that world of evals and constantly looking at your content and constantly fine tuning or context engineering that output to get as close as possible to what users desire it to be, right? And then the last thing I would say is that there is this notion of what's the best way of notion of last mile. Whatever technology creates for you, whether you are a musician or director, producer, artist, whatever it is, it's always a first draft. It's always an interim draft of the content, right? Because we are not at a point, and we might be at some point, but we are not at a point where you ask something and it will give you a fully baked version of what you expect,
No.
right? Then, and because of that, there is this notion of last mile, which is from that interim output that the generative AI gives me, I need to, as a user, take it across the finish line, which is the last mile. And companies need to start providing that capability, making it easy for the user to take it across the finish line. So that last part, again, was not something that was that important, but in this context becomes super important.
It's interesting you say this because I did about 3 years of UX at UCLA, and we talked about a lot of these elements you're talking about. And the more and more I understood, it's actually quite interesting what you're saying because what you're tapping into, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the human soul, vibe, feel, and how you press those buttons on your key, what you think about, what you feel like asking, what your job as the product manager and the team is to figure out what Steven is going to want to do and how he's going to do it. And you got to keep that kind of a basic and look at it from seven different angles, whatnot. Is that pretty much what you're referring to?
Yeah, you're right. I think, in some way, you kind of replicate human thinking,
Hmm.
right? You simulate human thinking. To simulate human thinking, there are two things that are important, right? There is intent recognition. I need to kind of know that when Stephen is saying something like this, but what exactly is he saying, right?
Mm,
For me, I need to understand that. Now, for me to understand that, I need to have this notion of memory,
mm,
right? Like, okay, Stephen says, I want to know more about foo. But I need to understand what Stephen means by foo. And that can only come from me really understanding you because from that memory of your preferences, about how you work, about what is your style and tone of writing things, what is your, of all the assets that you've created, I'm learning from that asset and storing in my memory. And so when Stephen asks me something, I know exactly what Stephen asking. And when you say foo, when I say foo and when you say foo, you might mean something different than what I mean. And so I
Mm,
need to, the system needs to recognize, oh, Stephen says foo, that's what he means. They just says foo, ah.
mm,
And based on that intent, I'm offering the right path to success or path to the
mm.
output. So yeah, you're right. Intent becomes huge.
Thing, because what I noticed was that some of the 20-year-olds that were doing UX, they were really slick about design and this and that. But when it came down to the core experience, they kind of petered out pretty quickly. Like they didn't know what. I think what it comes down to is life experience, like you're talking about, understanding, having the capacity to understand what the user wants. If you don't have the capacity, you're not going to be able to see what's going on. You won't
Right.
even pick up on it because you don't know. And if you don't know, you don't know, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So that's really important. The other thing is, there's a lot of fascinating so far. Fascinating. There's a lot of softwares and programs and apps that are coming out, right? Oh, and you see it everywhere. I mean, this is a program we got to do. So all they're doing, and correct me if I'm wrong, most of these gimmicks is what they are really. It's like going down to, some bazaar in some country and they're pitching you AI all over the internet, but none of it is really that great. And all they're doing is putting ChatGPT kind of a platform behind what they're doing. And it's a gimmick. And that's my first question. Is it a gimmick what you see out there?
No, I wouldn't say it's a gimmick. I think that the the models, the base models, right? ChatGPT and Claude and other. First of all, there are plenty of new models that are coming up, but these are obviously the big ones. The models are getting stronger, better, durable, which basically means that their ability to produce what you want, the ability to answer what you ask, and ability to action what you request from it is getting better almost on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the the models are the base platform, the base
Mm-hmm.
building block, right? I feel that the model forwardness is important to consider, and you got to make sure that whatever you build and whatever capability that you're pushing to the market accrues to the model forwardness, which means that as models improve, your capability should increase or get better. But you got to be able to point to your own IP versus only relying on the model. In other way, let's say you have a product that uses one of these underlying models. You should be able to say this statement. You should say that my product will continue to get better as the models improve, but my product will not work at all without this IP that I have in the product. You understand what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? Because that's the only way you can make it defensible. That's the only way you can make it durable.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
if you only rely on the model, then what are you building? What is your value add?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. This is the thing I'm talking about. For example, I'll keep it basic in a sense of, let's just call it posting on social Instagram, right? Oh, this app will, post for you, will do a million things for you. I mean, it goes back to what you're talking about, which is what is your IP,
Right.
right? That is important. And then it goes back even layers of what is your really UX product design of how you want to implement this thing. Because the reality is, I talked to a guy from TikTok, an executive from TikTok, and he was like, "Yeah, just post 100 posts a week." And I'm like, "Bro, like, what?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Like, that's just feeding the beast. Honestly, like, no substance.
Yeah.
Just, hey, I'm eating my coffee. Hey, I mean, what is it that we're doing?" And I think this is where technology can become numb. And that's why people sit there and they start scrolling, numb scrolling, and just looking at stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, a 17-year-old kid who's never played in the street, who's never went to the movies with his friends, who's never ditched school and went hiking, whatever, and all they know is scrolling. What is the effect to that person?
For young people, that has been the technology, the social media, or just the digitization or digitized life has been has been relevant from day one of their lives.
Hmm.
They don't know the thing that you and I know about, how we lived before all these things even were there. And so they have grown up in it, and I think they've learned to adopt it. But also feel that they're super smart. Like these kids, they are evolved. Again, from as compared to when we were that young. And I'll give you an example of it. I think my son was working with his friend, and they were building an app, and he sent me a prototype of it, and I kind of played around with it, and it was lightning fast. And so I sent him a note saying, "Hey, I just wanted to let you guys know that, um, it is super awesome. Like the speed was great, and it looks great." And then he responds back to me and says, "Oh yeah, thank you, and I'll also convey the your wishes to Mr. ChatGPT." Because they use ChatGPT to actually build a lot of that code. And I'm like, it is like, I think this is the right way to embrace it, right? I mean, you got to look at each and every one of your fields, and I'm talking about younger people as well. I think they indulging in this technology is given. I think they need to figure out how to engage with the technology more effectively, and that will benefit them. And I think one of the things that is relevant is if you take any field for that matter, you take your field of, like the big field of media in general, and the you look at healthcare, and you look at financial services, look at all these different things. You got to ask a question, which is, in this field, in the field that I do, in the job that I do, what role does AI play in terms of giving me an output that's closer to its finality?
Hmm.
The answer to that question is more than 70 to 80%. Then you got to think that maybe I need to do something, or upskill in some areas that are relevant to me, because
Hmm.
otherwise my entire kind of professional existence is at risk,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and I mean, we already know what's happening in music, the whole plagiarization and all that kind of stuff. And so people are innovating, and I think kids, because they've grown up in this world of technology, where technology has been a visceral part of their life. I think they're in a better position to figure that out. I think they just need guidance of these kinds, not detailed step by step guidance, but hey, go find out where
Hmm.
it makes the most sense.
Do you think that kids not having everyday life experience the way kids did in the 80s, for example, uh, obviously they're a different breed of kids, and as generations pass on, these kids won't have the experience if the parents didn't teach them that to what being human means. They
Yeah,
think being human means technology.
yeah.
So how do you see that point?
I don't think there's a clear answer to this, but I think, there are a few things that are important, right? There is one, which is kids, what we used to do growing up, which is we understood dignity of labor and the value of relationships and talking to people and marketing and selling skills by working at restaurants or other businesses. That should continue. I feel that is super super important as a foundational kind of aspect, right? I mean, you can't change what's happening with them from a technology. What you can do is you can arm them from outside,
Mm,
right? So I think that's one. The second is, I think the value of trade school. Like, everybody's not cut out for technology. We've got to accept and acknowledge that, right? The we have already seen increases in carpentry and mechanical jobs. Trade school enrollment has increased. And I think that's a good thing, because everybody doesn't need to go this route. They can actually be not a handyman, but a constructor, in construction and in other um, areas, and they can be very successful. And that by doing that, they can build those skills.
Hmm.
Because these skills are built through lived experience. Somebody telling you to go build skills will never happen. You know that,
Never happened.
right? I
Never
mean,
happened.
you try telling this to our kids. I mean, it doesn't work. But yeah, I mean, I think the exposing or providing this avenue for exposing kids to these other avenues where technology just becomes a catalyst.
Yeah.
It's a tool, right?
Hmm.
But they build
Hmm.
skills in areas that matter. There is no such
Hmm.
thing as building skill in technology. Some of them would do, but I
Hmm.
mean, computer science, for example. I mean, I think CEO of NVIDIA was talking about it. That guess what? Somebody asked him a question that, hey, who do you think are smart people? And he's like, well, the think about smart definition of smartness is different and it needs to change because think about that earlier we used to always consider computer science graduates computer science engineers as the smartest. Guess what is the first thing AI solved is coding. So how can you say that they're smart, right? I mean, and I mean this is a funny comment and an interesting comment in itself, but I think that's what I was kind
Yeah.
of referring to, that
Yeah.
there are so many avenues for kids to actually go and engage.
You're absolutely right. And you answered my last question, which was, do you think AI is a tool? And you answered that in what you just said, that it is a tool, and I don't think it can replace being a human. I compare AI technology to a couple of dogs. When two dogs come together and they see each other, they smell each other, they bump each other. AI will never be able to do that. Impossible. Because that's the spirit, the human, the animal. That's not, you can't teach that. As far you can replicate it to a certain extent, but you can't teach that because that's not what it is. It doesn't have it doesn't have a soul, whatever you want to call that. It doesn't have blood, it doesn't have flesh. It's just a program. So it's like a car, it doesn't mean it. So I think it's definitely going to be a tool thing.
The only thing I would say is that, the one big thing that is happening is the the focus and evolution of agents in general, right?
Mm,
That's literally the next frontier, and that on that in that horizon, I think you see a world where humans and agents play together,
mm,
agents and agents play together, right?
mm,
There are some areas where you don't need a human to actually get some job done. Agents can
mm,
work with themselves and they can figure it out. But
mm,
human always needs to be in the loop. Human will always need to be in
mm,
control. And 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 because of that, because of the natural language expression and all the prompting and generative AI, what has also happened is that the domain or functional users who are the closest to the processes, they have they are able to take their destiny on their own hands and not rely on IT anymore,
mm.
right? They can create their own agents and things. And so I think they would be in a better place to really drive and build the right optimal solution for their problems, where agents and technology can be a part of that ecosystem without threatening.
Amen. Tejas, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I think your insight as a product manager and your experience has just been tremendous. So, really appreciate you coming on, man.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. That was great.